Welcome back to the Christian Century YouTube channel. I'm John, and I'm joined today by one of our Voices columnists, Jonathan Tran, who has written a piece for us recently called One Person's Self-Made Hell. We're going to be talking about that essay today. But as you can see, we have a little bit of a special video today as well, because we're joined not only by Jonathan, but by two other guests, Clark and Diane. Uh, the article, if you haven't gotten a chance to read it, is about a courtroom trial that Jonathan attended, um, about a hit and run that had occurred and resulted in a tragic death. Clark and Diane Grotberg, who are joining us today, are the parents of David, the victim whose killer was put on trial in that case. So in this video, I'm mainly going to sit back and join you in listening to this conversation that Jonathan is going to have with Clark and Diane. To get us started, I'll just say welcome to all three of you. Thanks so much for being here. Jonathan, to kick off the conversation, I wondered if you could just tell us a little bit more about the context of you writing this piece. Why were you at this trial, and what inspired you to write this essay about what happened there?
Sure. Well, first, thanks for having us on. Thanks for having me on. It's a great honor to work and write for the Century, and the the magazine's allowance for me to write about a whole lot of things that matter deeply to me has been really important. One of the things that has mattered deeply to me over almost for 10 years now is a story that I came across when I was living on campus at Baylor University. I was serving in a capacity where I lived alongside students in a residential college, the Honors Residential College. One of our shining lights in that community, David Grotberg, went out one night with his girlfriend to see a movie, and he was killed in a hit and run. It was a horrific accident, made even more horrific by the years that would follow, where the Grotberg family was given very little chance to find peace and solace for what happened, because the person who killed David consistently for 7 years lied about it. And I'll say something about the nature of lies later on, but she effectively lied about it. And then she more recently put the family through a trial, even though the evidence was very clear that she had done it. And the trial was horrific both in itself, but horrific in dragging this poor family um, through details that were really awful to have to revisit. So through all of that, I have been blessed and honored to know and get to know the Grotberg family. There's no silver lining to David's death. I don't mean it that way. I mean, it is often the case that we find God in places that we really didn't expect. And this is a place I thought of as one of the most dark, one of the darkest places I'd ever been. This person's story, but then I also got to discover the light that is David Grotberg and David Grotberg's family. Mr. and Mrs. Grotberg are here with us. They have a bunch of other children, many others who have also come to Baylor to our good luck. When you invited me to talk more about the piece, John, we thought it would be the three of us thought, two of us thought it would be way better, instead of listening to me, to invite the Grotbergs, and they are here with us. So thank you, Clark and Diane, for your story and sharing it with us today.
Of course.
So, as I wrote in the article, and as I think readers know, your son David was killed, and and then there was this trial, and we all stayed in touch, and I followed the trial and the very slow workings of it until it finally actually happened. We want to get to the story of David and how he was killed, but what was it like all those years before the trial even started? What was it like for you and your family?
Well, I think there were two phases to it. First, for the first 2 years after David was killed, we didn't think we would ever have a trial because the Waco police didn't know who had killed him. So those first 2 years were just dealing with the grief of his loss. And then it was in September. He was killed in October. And almost 2 years later is when we got the phone call that they had a suspect. So then the next 5 years were the years of waiting to find out what was going to happen. I think those years were slow. They were hard, especially as we got to trial dates that were then canceled. I homeschool, and I'd be sitting in our living room reading with my kids. The phone would ring, it'd be Clark. Every single time the phone rang, I wondered if it was about the trial. Is it being canceled, or has a new date been set? Has new information come out? So I feel like those years were just so long, and so it felt really, it's just like a big unknown what's going to happen, and we felt there could be no closure.
Yeah, those 5 years, there was always a cloud just kind of hanging, just not knowing, is it going to happen? When's it going to happen? The detectives and the prosecutors assured us that they knew they had the right person. It was just a matter of the process, going through the process. They warned us that it was going to be a long haul. They didn't expect it to be as long as it was. But thankfully, this last January, February, that portion of the journey finally came to a close.
Once the trial was set and not canceled or not further delayed, what was the emotion and feeling as you all came down from Minnesota, even the moments as you pulled up to the courthouse? I mean, this had been your life for years. And then here you were, and then you're going to be 10, 15 feet away from this woman that killed your son. Like, what was the feelings just walking into the thing?
That's a good question. I think, one of my daughters had said, I'll believe it's happening when we're sitting in the courtroom and the trial starts. So I think we were still in the situation where, is this actually going to happen? And we had no idea how we were going to feel. I kept thinking, what am I going to do when I see her? Because she so radically changed our lives. And then and the fact that she never confessed and never sought any sort of forgiveness, I didn't know how I was going to respond. We really didn't know. But the other thing that was going on is all our family was coming together. I have 2 kids. I have 1 kid, and her husband will live in Wisconsin. Mary was in Texas. She was coming. Thomas lives in Minneapolis. He was coming. So there was this sense of our whole family coming together for this. And so I think there was a lot of comfort in there and a lot of support. So Tammy Blankenship was just some person sitting there, but we had everybody with us. We had all that support. And I think we're just going to sit there to see what happened. Yeah. It's hard to really describe the feelings because we're so clueless. We didn't know what it was going to be like. We had no clue what it was going to be like. So kind of just buckled in and went for it.
And I think we were both surprised too, that the lack of emotion that we actually had towards Tammy. There was just, like Diane said, she was just a person in the trial that we were watching. Obviously, we know she killed him. We know for whatever reason, she doesn't regard life in the same way that we do. And that's always been troubling. But as far as just even coming to see her, I did wonder if there would be some, thoughts of anger or feelings of anger. Not a good anger, but there wasn't. And we were very thankful that we were shielded from that, because that's not right. And David would not have been impressed if we were angry in a bad way. It's okay to be angry. There is a time, what she did was terrible, was horrific. And equally as horrific was her response to it all.
So when you talk about it, and the idea of a trial is to kind of get to what happened, the truth of it, even if there are forces arrayed against the truth of things. What would you want people to know about what happened? So let's go back, and then so that folks have a sense of the story itself, and then we can think more about the trial together. But what do you want folks to know happened to David?
As far as just the actual that night,
Yeah, but I imagine that also includes your love and fondness for David, and as you said, it impacts your life. It transforms your life.
Sure. So David was our oldest, and when he stepped into our life, he radically changed our lives. Diane was in law school at the time. She was in her second year of law school, and the moment he was born, I knew that being a lawyer was not in her near future. Maybe at some point, maybe, but we knew that life had drastically changed. And David was that way his entire life. He was constantly pushing the boundaries. He changed us dramatically as a family all the way through. When he ended up at Baylor, we knew that he was home. We knew that he was in a great place. He loved you all so much, and we were just getting to know a little bit of the Baylor that he loved. He was there for a full year, came home. We could tell this was no longer his home. He wanted to be back at Baylor. He loved his family here, but he wanted to be back with his Baylor family. So he started the next semester, the second year, and we had finally decided we're coming down to watch him march. He was in the marching band at Baylor, and so it was going to be our first trip to see him. Unfortunately, he was killed a month before and that we made that trip. We got the knock on the door late in the evening. Our oldest daughter Mary actually heard the police outside. She said, "Dad," came in our room, "Dad, somebody is outside and I think they're trying to get in the house." So of course I went down right away and saw that it was the sheriffs. They asked if Diane was home. I went and got Diane, and they said, "You have a son, David, at Baylor?" We said yes. And Diane was, and as we talked about it later, Diane was thinking, why would you be asking about David? He certainly would have done nothing wrong. And in my brain was going, please tell me he's alive. And they told us he was deceased. Most horrific news we've ever heard. David was so full of life. I always wondered. I've told people this. I always wondered when David went to school, if something happened to Diane or one of the other kids, how would I tell David? How would I inform him if he was in middle school? How would I make that call and tell him what happened? I never, in my wildest dreams, thought it would be David. So the police told us he was out biking, coming back from a movie, was hit by someone. They didn't know who. It was a hit and run. And from there, the Baylor family stepped in. They really did. I believe you called us that next morning. I know Chaplain Burleson did. Dr. Odajima called us, and the word that kept coming to me during that morning was, "We need you to come to Baylor. There's a dark hole at Baylor that can't be filled." And both of us were like, what's going on? We knew David was full of life. We knew that he was a pretty incredible kid, but he was our kid. That's all we knew. And do you want to step in, or do you want to? So then, go ahead.
Well, I just read something. The students put out some sort of just like a really thin little yearbook type thing, just memories. And I just reread some of the thoughts of David, and it was a little embarrassing the way he behaved with zombies and assassins. And it seemed like that was the focus of his time at Baylor, was scheming on how to defeat the humans. But I read that with a chuckle that he just, I guess he made himself present at Baylor with his shenanigans and his schemings, and then the students just wrote some memories of him, and it was so sweet, just about how David made everyone feel like their best friend, and that they can't wait. They look forward to the day when they'll see him again. And I thought that was just a really sweet sentiment, that they too believe that we'll see him again. But yeah, we were at a band concert let's see, what day is it? Friday. On Wednesday, we're at a band concert. It's the last band concert for David's favorite sister, Sarah. And she played in the balcony a piece that was written for a Minnesota kid who died when he was 20 in an accident. And we had a couple deaths this year in the school, and they were playing it in memory, and she was playing the solo really in memory of her brother. And it brought back to me all those horrifying months and probably first 2 years of his death and what it felt like to grieve, that grief to be so fresh. And I thought, oh, thank God I'm not there anymore. You know, that we've processed a lot. We've had a lot of change in our family. A lot of good things happen. But grief is such horrible, horrible hard work that you do. And you just have to go through it. But it's always there. I mean, we carry it. It's hard to kind of process it. And in terms of the trial, to sit there and think this is just one more step in this horrible journey that we're on. It was a great step. I mean, I'm really glad to go through it and find that guilty verdict. But yeah, a horrible step in our new reality, I guess.
Yeah.
Kind of a long haul here for us.
You know, and since then we've had 3 weddings and 1 new baby that's going to be born this month, and which are all wonderful things, and we're so thankful for. But there is always a little bit of a cloud that you think, oh, you know, like with Mary having a baby, it's like, oh, we probably would have had a couple of grandkids by now. You know, that thought always jumps right in. When somebody gets married, it was like, oh yeah, David was on the track to get married. And so, you know, while you live in joy and we know that we will see him again someday, you also live with the sorrow, you know, and to watch, you know, as we went through the trial, it was quite interesting what came out of that trial. But to watch somebody who appears to have such a disregard for life, that was tough to see. Yeah.
One of the, I mean, the story of David and the story around David is extraordinary in any number of ways, and then we'll get to some of this. But one of the really extraordinary things between me and the Grotbergs, and the Century readers will know this because I've written also about this, is that my brother was killed also by a car when he was a kid. Right in front of me, he was hit by a car, and his name was David. My son, our youngest, is named David for this reason. And I mean, there are so many things that connects one to a family like the Grotbergs, but for me, that was one additional way that it was just a remarkable set of connections. The second home that they talk about, their Baylor family, was for David, the Golden Wave Band in that remarkable community, and the Honors Residential College. So for those who don't know what a residential college is maybe to think about it through the counterfactuals, to say something like, there's a lot of parts of college that form us or malform us in pretty unhelpful ways. So think about the party scene that takes place on Friday and Saturdays, and the mixing of alcohol with really young folks who are just kind of coming into their own as adults. Well, residential colleges across America and other places, certainly at Baylor, are places that imagine life differently. That what we have is education as a picture of moral formation, and the way we do that is through one another. That's what God most wants of these years. And so the thing that Mrs. Grotberg mentioned, the humans versus zombies game, was what the students in our community, you know, there's 300 students, about 150 participate each year. What they do on Friday and Saturdays is they don't go out and drink. They stay in and dress up like humans or zombies in a massive Nerf gun war all over the campus. And it's a way of saying we're going to be constituted differently. And David wasn't simply a part of humans versus zombies. He was the absolute ringleader. In fact, one of the most enduring and endearing pictures I have cemented in my mind is David with the green bandana, which marked which team he was on. and he was always, I mean, again, the Honors Residential College, just by you can imagine the name, is full of very type A personalities, very, very gifted people, and David stood out. So the night that the Grotbergs and Clark and Diane just explained it on their end, that same evening, maybe about the same time, I and the staff of the Honors Residential College woke up and gathered about 45 of our leaders in a small room. And I was faced with the daunting prospect of telling them their very, very good friend and leader, David, had been killed. And I just didn't know how to do it. And that's what I said. I said, we're sorry to wake you. We're sorry to pull you away from whatever you're doing. But your really good friend, David Grotberg, was hit and killed in a car accident tonight. And it wasn't like, a few seconds or minutes of like delayed. It was as soon as I finished the sentence, people were screaming in the room. And that's a function of the loss of any college kid in a community, but it's also the loss of this particular college kid. The deep impact he had in like 10 months. And now the impact that he's had now going on 8 years in this community and at Baylor. So, and I hope that gives folks a sense of the gravity of this human being. If I could jump forward then to the trial so that people have a sense of the background story. One of the things you said, Clark, early to me, which again cemented just the depth of y'all's faith, was you said as the police began looking for the person that killed your son, you said, I'm not hoping and praying ill will on this person. I'm not hoping the police will catch them so that they can be punished. I want this person to be free of this burden.
Right.
I want the police to be able to do their work. And this is hard work. And your thoughts were all about this person that killed your son and about the police officers charged with this horrible task. And it just, I mean, I would be thinking very different things if someone killed my son. Maybe the opposite things.
honestly, Jonathan, that I had a conversation with a good friend of mine here in Fergus about a month before David was killed, and we were talking about somebody else who had been killed up here. And he asked me, we both have 6 kids, and he asked me, what would you do if somebody did something to one of your kids? And right out of my mouth came, I would take care of things and ask for forgiveness later. I would go after that person, and they would get to know Jesus in a real quick way. So my response, and I can only say this is of God, because it surprised me when the police told us that David had been killed. Diane screamed like the screams probably that you heard in the Honors Residential College, and I grabbed her and I held on to her, and the only thing that came out of my mouth was, God is good, because all I could think of was that if God was good yesterday when David was alive and well, he's got to be good today. Otherwise, none of this makes sense. So Baylor brought us down that first week, which was one of the most healing things for us, was that first trip to Baylor. But we met with the detective, and he was very solemn, dealing with a horrific scene, not knowing anything. But he was very honest, which we appreciated. And he looked at us and he said, I'm sorry. He said, I've had 3 cases like this in my career that I've not been able to solve, and I believe that this is going to be the 4th. And I looked right back at him and I said, Detective Clark, I want you to know that we understand that. Please go on and do your job. We hope that you find this individual. So first of all, that they don't do it to somebody else. But second, most importantly, that somehow through this, maybe this individual can get to know the same Jesus that David knew. And that was kind of the very beginning of a very good friendship with Detective Clark, because he said he's never had anybody say that to him at a time like that. And It was of God, Jonathan, because I'm like you. I would have thought I would have had a very different response, and I'm thankful because that is how David would have expected the response. So that's part of it too. I mean, it's God, but it's always David on our shoulder saying, "Seriously, I thought we were Christians."
Behave yourself.
David never shied away from telling people what he thought was right.
No.
Oh, no. I mean, I think there were lots of things going on. When he was like right when he was killed, I remember thinking, okay, I can't do this. Nope. And God saying, you've been trained your whole life to do this. And thinking, okay, what does it mean to be a Christian? You know, what does it actually mean? Do I believe or do I not believe? And we kind of lived a life that there's really no plan B. So I'm sticking with plan A. And so that's all I've got. I'm either a believer or I'm in really deep trouble. I think there was that God just moving in and saying, you know, I mean, horrible things happen to people. God is still God. But then there was also this sense that, I mean, David was just David. I mean, we raised him to be a Christian, but he just very early on kind of grasped the idea of faith really, really deeply. And so you thought, okay, we all believe the same thing. David sometimes seemed a little better at it, so I'm just going to follow his lead here. And he's still kind of whispering in our ears.
Yes.
I have a few questions for him. I can't quite figure out, but
and when she says whisper, she means quite loudly in his very stern voice.
But I think we just kind of innately had this sense that we're going to live out the faith we taught him and the faith that he had. We're not going to dishonor his memory. That would be horrible. And so it was kind of, well, here we go. What I don't even know what this means, but here it is. You know, we've got to live this out in honor of him. And obviously the Holy Spirit moves in and you say, okay, we're going to do this together or I'm going to fail alone. And I think that's what we've made an attempt to do. It's not always pretty. I have to be honest. It's just, sometimes you just simply want to give up. It's horrible. And you're trying to raise other kids and you're trying to be Christian and you just don't want to do it anymore. But I guess, you know, since we don't have a plan B, we're going to stick with this one. And the Holy Spirit does move in. I'll say if you allow him to move in and help you through it, he does move in. But I at the same time, it doesn't really take the mess away. We still have to live with it. And as we go through other things, kids graduating high school, going to college, you just miss his advice. He'd be 27. He'd really have some good advice on his younger siblings. We just didn't get enough time.
Yeah. And that night, both of us really felt like God spoke to us and said, are you going to do this on your own or do you want my help? And we were both like, we can't do this on our own. And I'm here to tell you, when Diane was talking about allowing God to come in, when you allow him, he sat on these living room chairs that we're on right now and wept with us. And we've been Christians all our lives and never have I felt the presence of God in such a way. I mean, it was amazing. It was like sitting just like Diane and I are sitting, and the tears flowed. And so it's good. I mean, God is a good God. Didn't intend for this to happen to David. I don't believe that in any way, shape, or form. But caught him in his loving arms and caught us in his loving arms. And, you know, as the 23rd Psalm says, he'll walk with us through the valley of darkness. Doesn't say he'll take us out of it. Doesn't say he's going to light the valley up. He says he'll walk through with us and we'll fear no evil. And that's where we've been.
Yeah, I want to underscore something you all said. So, Diane, you said that God had prepared you your whole life for this. So usually when people use a locution like that, they mean they've achieved something amazing. They won a certain trophy or some kind of academic accolade, or they got into, you know, this place or this job. God's prepared me for this. Mm-hmm. Used it as God has prepared you, your faith, your heart, your soul for handling the death of your son. I mean, that is, at least as I read the scriptures, that's actually much more consistent with how that term locution should be used. it's such an extraordinarily countercultural way of thinking about what we're made to be and do in this life. So I just want to underscore that. I want to, for the rest of our time, really ask about two other places in the trial where God came in. That's a phrase you all have used, where God showed up. One in a pretty strange, controversial, to me, bizarre way that I reference in the article, but I didn't have space to get into. But I want listeners to think more about this and do how you all think about it, and then some things you all said at the end of the trial. So the first is, you all have talked about how God showed up and came in for you. What was amazing about the woman that killed your son is she consistently described God coming in for her, and in pretty remarkable ways. So, so for folks who were not at the trial, the evidence was mounting up pretty quickly when Tammy realized what she had done. And she herself began to feel the weight of this evidence really in the next day after she had killed David. And when the evidence mounted to such a degree that it became undeniable, the way she got out of coming to the conclusion that she had killed this kid, which was like all over the news, was that God told her so. That God told her it wasn't a human being, it was a stop sign. And remarkably, in the conversation with her friend, colleague, subordinate, in a series of text messages, they literally exchanged Bible verses to confirm that God had told her. Now, as a student of and a teacher of theology, I constantly, am confronted with this evangelical notion. I can do X because God told me so. I can date this lemon, even though everyone knows he's a lemon, because God told me so. I'm going to choose this job because, even though it's not a obvious career path by the standards of the New Testament, because God told me so. So I've seen like the kind of straw man versions of this thing, but to hear it in a courtroom to justify why you didn't go to the police, the possibility of killing a human being, it was because God told her. Now, you all have narrated how God also told you things and came in for you. What were you thinking at that moment as Christians, as people, living with this reality for 7 years?
I had no idea that had been said. We knew things. We didn't know a lot of things, a lot of details, but that was certainly one that I had no idea was out there. But at the same time, growing up, as I grew up, these aren't new ideas to me either. Within my own family, they are not practiced or preached. I'm the daughter of a pastor and the granddaughter of a pastor, and we don't participate in that. But it wasn't a new idea, but it was almost, to me, it was so ridiculous and so laughable to say I didn't do a bad thing because God didn't tell me I didn't do a bad thing. I'm like, think about what you're saying and how inconsistent that is with who God is. And when I felt like God said to me, you've been raised for this, you've been, you know how to handle this, it's because my whole life I had learned and studied who God really is. And this is the opposite of who God is, to say, I don't have to bear responsibility for what I've done because I'm not. I think she thinks because she's too good of a person to bear responsibility. So you're going to squirm out of it because God told you. That's just bizarre. But it was, I guess to me, it was just it was a little bit insulting because that's not who God is. And we all know that's not who God is. But it was just kind of laughable to me. It's silly.
Yeah. Yeah. When people say, God told me, or God did this, we've had different people say that to us over the years about different things. And my first response is always, well, is that consistent with who we know God to be? And from his word and from everything we know about God, is that consistent? And just like in Tammy's case, that was not consistent with who God is. God doesn't say, "Oh, you're free to go. Have a nice day. Don't go to anybody." If it had been a word from God, I believe that God would have said, "Tammy, if you didn't do this, go down to the police and clear yourself, just so that so that everybody knows that it's done."
And she said initially she thought she'd hit a homeless person, so that person could be lying on the side of the road, dying, and that didn't seem of great concern to her. So I think her understanding of how God works and ours is completely different.
And that homeless comment, I'd just like to touch on that too, because that after hearing that David was killed and Diane screamed, when we first heard that Tammy said she wouldn't have killed that kid, she thought she hit a homeless person. That was the third most horrific thing I've ever heard. And for two reasons. One is, if a homeless person's life doesn't matter, then David's life didn't matter, and our lives don't matter. I mean, because we're all children of God. We're all human beings, so we all matter equally. And then, but on top of that, for the time that David was 14 years old, he would come out to the shop where I work and work to make money, to take that money and go down to Guatemala and spend his summers down in Guatemala serving orphans, homeless people. And to hear that not only she killed David, but that was her view of life, it's so contrary to who David was. And it was amazing that somebody could look at it that way. And fortunately, the detective had the same feelings that we did. He was like, "Excuse me, what?" And then when we watched the video during the trial, we knew that she had made that comment. We didn't know that she had made that comment so many times, over and over, and that she was sticking, as that was a plausible reason for her to not stop, was that it was simply just a homeless person. It's crazy.
Yeah, the Grotbergs are talking about, for those who weren't there in the interrogation years later, when the police kind of finally caught up with her. It's it's an astounding video of her first saying it's a stop sign, presented with clear evidence that it was a human being, and then repeatedly saying, well, it was just a homeless person. It was one of the most shocking things I've ever seen. So last question for you all, and again, thank you for your time and willingness to jump into these things. Another kind of place where God shows up in again, a remarkable way, was at the end of the trial. So at the end of the trial, for those who weren't there, in the state of Texas, the verdict is read as she was found guilty. And then there's an allowance for the families to say, and the point here isn't on the previous end before the verdict is given, right? Or even the sentencing. It's really an opportunity for the families, the victims, to give voice, to be there, to have agency, to be present. And so I want to hear you all talk a little bit about the end. So in America, right, we have some, justice is a tough thing. It's clearly one of the most important things to us, and as it should be. It's a core moral virtue and value. But we struggle with justice, right? We either want justice to be, it's all good. You did this terrible thing, but let's just move on. Or we want justice just to crush the person that has hurt us or wounded us. At the end, your family read statements that, I wish people could just read the statements. They are some of the most, it's just beautiful writing on the one hand, but one of the most astounding, remarkable set of comments I've ever read. I read it after the fact, and I texted Clark afterwards. I was just like, tears were just running down my face. And it's not like I didn't know the story. I think I know the story fairly well. But it was almost like I experienced the story all over again by reading y'all's statements. And when I was writing about it for the century-piece, John, I actually struggled with the right sentence, because how do you capture in a sentence the raw truth-telling of it with its grace? Like I found it incredibly hard to put that into words. And so that what I did, what we in the Century just decided is just let the Grotbergs say it themselves. I think the best I could come up with was like the family lit into her, or tore
Yeah.
it. It was so intense.
Yeah, it was.
So tell us how you think about the end, about Tammy now, about the balance of grace and truth, as the Gospel of John puts it. Um, how do you hold that in one person, one story?
Uh, you know, well, first, about the statements, we had a lot of time. I was very blessed, I guess, in a very weird sense, to have that time to process what we were thinking and how we were feeling. What, as Christians, it was right to say, to be true to our faith, but also to be able to say, you did something so horrible to us, we can't recover. We can't. The only way we can recover is to have them back, and that's not in our near future. But it was, I think it was really helpful for us to be able to say what we thought, and to let her know that she's made in God's image, and we have to respect the image of God in her. And so we as believers have to offer some form of outreach to reconciliation. That's our responsibility. She has not shown any interest, but we hope someday she will. But I know immediately after the trial, I just, and the whole time, I just couldn't think about her a whole lot. And early on, people would say, oh, we feel so bad for her that she's this way. We feel bad for her family. And I thought, I am in the midst of grief for someone killing my kid, and you want me to feel bad for her. I just wasn't there. I think after the trial, I still kind of had to place her on a shelf and really not talk about my feelings for her. I just didn't think about it. And slowly, I've been having more of a sense of sadness and a desire for her to come to honesty, to truth. And I've, not every day, but I've been able to pray just a little bit for her as I process my feelings. That, yes, I mean, I hope other people are praying for her. I really, truly do. But my heart is softening towards her. It's got to be the work of the Holy Spirit, because I really didn't expect that. But I honestly hope that and pray that someday she really does seek to reconcile with us, because otherwise, I mean, I think you put it so beautifully. She really is. She's living just this horrible lie, and it's just destroying everything. And I do not want that for her.
Yeah. You got more?
No, okay. I'm
done. Jonathan, when you wrote in there about the mercy, I think that was quite fitting. You were there for it all. When I was the last one to give the victim statement, and I had my prepared piece, and then I set that aside, and my family went, "Oh no, Dad's going off script. This is not going to be good." But towards the end of the trial, her attorney was trying to make it out like he understood us, he understood Christianity, he understood God, and just horribly got it wrong from our perspective. That he just didn't understand it at all. And so the last thing I said to her, if you remember, was, Tammy, your representative got it wrong. Will, the prosecutor, and this jury, they got it right. And I believe that they gave her a very fair but merciful judgment. And in that, I think it's merciful that she's sitting in jail right now. I'm hoping, and I told her, I said, I hope you take this time to get your life right with God, to figure things out and get your life right with God. And if she does, Dave would be the first person to wrap his arms around her and pull her closer to Jesus. And if she doesn't, I fear for her soul, because it's ugly. I mean, and sin is ugly, and it's just, you see that come through at a time like this. But we did talk about the statements afterwards, and a couple of the kids like, wow, that was pretty tough, and that was pretty harsh. And I said, straightforward and tough, yes. Harsh, I don't think so. I think you got it right where you said it is merciful to call that out, because when we see someone who's living in sin and we don't say anything and we just allow it to go on, that's actually harsh. That's allowing that person to go down a path farther from God. But when things are put to us, and I hope she receives it. I hope I really pray. This is, Jonathan, kind of wrap around at the beginning. This has been my hope from day one, is that she does get to know the same Jesus that David knew. She appears to pretend she does, but she does not. And I'm hoping she's taking this time now to do that.
And I have to say, I appreciate you, recognizing what we were trying to do. I think some people have felt they haven't heard our statements, but they've been all, oh, you just need to forgive and you just need to move on. And you need to, I feel bad for her. And I thought, you're just not getting it. You're not understanding what has happened, the grief that we carry, what she did to us, and that there has been no attempt to apologize, to accept the wrong that she did. And we are doing no favors just to brush over it. So I thought, yes, you kind of affirmed, we knew what we needed to do, but you affirmed us in saying, yeah, you did the right thing. And I just really appreciated that, because the whole family felt, for the most part, really comfortable with what we did. And I will say, when Mary and Sarah were saying the words they said, especially Sarah, she's just a high school student, and it was just really difficult. They were so close. And for her to say what she had to say, I thought, it is horrible for me to hear my daughter say these words, but these are words that have to be said. It wasn't that Sarah was saying anything wrong. It just broke my heart that they needed to be said. Yeah. And even to hear things that Mary said, she's a little bit older, and I had read her statement, but I hadn't done much on it. And I thought, this is my broken-hearted daughter at 23 years old, 6 months pregnant, having to say these really, really difficult things. And we heard things that we didn't know. They shared things that they hadn't shared before. So it was good. It was healing. I know that Sarah, after the whole thing, said a weight's been lifted from my shoulders. She's headed off to college in August. So it was a good thing that we got that through.
And Sarah, Jonathan, you probably know this from being at the trial and reading the statements. Sarah's birthday is October 7th, and she was woken up very early on October 7th. And something we do in our family is, it's a goal to see who can wish happy birthday first. And so we've been known to set alarm clocks for midnight. And when I woke Sarah up, she thought I was waking her up to wish her happy birthday. And she got the news that her favorite person on the planet had been killed. And so, but she hadn't talked much. I mean, she talked a lot about missing David all these years, but she hadn't really put to words how she felt about that night. And boy, it was rough. It was rough, but it was good. It was good for her to do it. It was good for Tammy to hear it. And again, whether she received it or not, I don't know.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking time, y'all. Again, it's an amazing story at so many different parts of the story, and it continues to be, I think, is evident just from our little bit of time with you. Yeah, about the end, I mean, Sarah went on to say, for the rest of my life, I'll associate my birthday with horror, with you killing my brother. And that's like a little thing you wouldn't think of, right? You wouldn't think, okay, right, if someone in my life is killed, like none of us go through the thought conclusion of what that will mean. And for Sarah, it's every year of my birthday when I'm celebrated, it's the surprise party or people forget or whatever. For me, it will be the memory of this thing. And that is such an extraordinary truth, but it's grace for that reason. It's saying, this is what you've done. I know you don't want to think you did it, but think about your own birthday or your own kids' birthdays. And now for me, it's this. And so that's what was really remarkable. I mean, and then the last words of the article are, Clark, you're the last one to speak. And you talked about the scene, imagined scene in heaven, that if she were to come to terms, and then if David were to see her in heaven, that he would embrace her. I was reminded of this adage that C.S. Lewis said, which was, when you get to heaven, you'll be surprised by three things: who's there, who's not there, and that you're there.
Yeah.
You could add the David Grotberg addendum to it that would say, if I saw if I saw the killer of my child in heaven, I would have said there's something wrong here.
Right.
Grotbergs would say there's something right here.
Yeah.
Something right. Something has been made right. And that is, I think that captures the depth of your faith, which is, again, there's no silver lining in David's death, but the witness of your faith, again, just a remarkable thing.
I just want to say thank you to all three of you. Jonathan, thank you for writing this piece. Thank you for facilitating this conversation here today. Diane and Clark, I'm so grateful for your time with us, for sharing part of your story. Just as a human being, I'm encouraged to hear some of the ways that you have experienced God's presence in this grieving journey, in the hardest parts of this grieving journey. So thank you so much. Anyone out there who missed this article, there will be a link below in the video description where you can read the essay from Jonathan. We'll also have a link to a video that was put out by Baylor University where you can learn more about this. All three of you, thank you for your time. Thank you for your vulnerability. I so appreciate you joining us today.
Thank you.
You're welcome.